Studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is January the 20th day of the new year. Just 345 days remaining to the year's over with. It is also the date that President Trump assumed power as the 47th President of the United States. It came out during the speeches that before leaving the White House to go to the Capitol Rotunda, President Biden pardoned his entire family. So all the crimes and shenanigans they've done over the last 4 years, they're home free. Hunter Biden, who got a pardon from his father, who said, I wouldn't pardon my son, I'm not going to interfere with the rule of law, gets to keep the millions of dollars that he absconded with, most of which went up his nose or to pay for prostitutes, according to rumors. So where's the rule of law that he swore was paramount in his mind? Well, I guess you get what you pay for. And the cost of President Biden was astronomical in terms of dollars. Well, on this day in the year 250, Pope Fabian is martyred during the Decian persecution. For those who don't know what that was, Christians were persecuted in 250 AD under the Roman Emperor Decius. Issued an edict ordering anybody in the empire or everybody in the empire to perform a sacrifice to the Roman gods and the well-being of the emperor. And the sacrifices had to be performed in the presence of a Roman magistrate and be confirmed by a signed and witness certificate from the magistrate. A lot of examples of those certificates have survived over the eons. It was intended to act as an empire-wide loyalty oath to the new emperor, who came to power in 249 AD, sanctified through the Roman religion. Of course, Christian monotheistic beliefs didn't allow them to worship any of the gods, so they were forced to choose between their religious beliefs and following the decree. He wanted to revive Rome's golden age, adding the name of one of his most admired predecessors, Trajan, to his own, revived the ancient office of censor, and restored the Colosseum. Unfortunately, it led to a lot of death and destruction. Now what? In 1156 AD, Finnish peasant Lalili kills English clergyman Henry, the Bishop of Turku, and on the ice of Lake Corregidor. All right, 1265, the first English Parliament to include not only lords but representatives of the major towns holds its first meeting in the Palace of Westminster. It's now commonly referred to as the Houses of Parliament. 1320, Duke Władysław Locke becomes the King of Poland. 1356, Edward Balliol surrenders his claim to the Scottish throne to Edward III in exchange for an English pension. 1401, Taula de Canva, the Catalan Table of Exchange, described as Europe's first ever public bank, begins operation inside Barcelona's Lotja de Mar. 1523, Christian II is forced to abdicate as king of Denmark and Norway. 1567, the Battle of Rio de Janeiro. Portuguese forces under the command of Estácio de Sá definitively drive the French out of Rio de Janeiro. 1576, the Mexican city of Leon is founded by order of the Viceroy, Don Martin Enriquez de Almanza. 1649, the High Court of Justice for the trial of Charles I begins its proceedings. 1783, the Kingdom of Great Britain signs preliminary articles of peace with the Kingdom of France, setting the stage for the official end of hostilities in the American Revolutionary War later on that year. 1785, invading Siamese forces attempt to exploit the political chaos in Vietnam, but they're ambushed and annihilated at the Mekong River by the Tay Son in the Battle of Rakam Mut. 1788, the third and main part of the First Fleet arrives at Botany Bay, beginning the British colonization of Australia. Arthur Phillip decides that Port Jackson is a more suitable location for a colony. 1839, in the Battle of Yungay, Chile defeats an alliance between Peru and Bolivia. 1841, Hong Kong Island is occupied by the British during the First Opium War. 1874, the Treaty of Pankor is signed between the British and Sultan Abdullah of Perak, paving the way for further British colonization of Malaya. 1877, the last day of the Constantinople Conference, results in agreements for political reforms in the Balkans. 1887, the U.S. Senate allows the Navy to lease Pearl Harbor as a naval base. 1909, newly formed automaker General Motors buys into the Oakland Motor Car Company, which later becomes GM's long-running Pontiac division. 1921, first Constitution of Turkey is adopted, making fundamental changes in the source and exercise of sovereignty by consecrating the principle of national sovereignty. 1937, Franklin D. Roosevelt and John Nance Garner are sworn in for their second terms as president and vice president. First time a presidential inauguration takes place on January 20th since the 20th Amendment changed the dates of presidential terms. And today, as I said earlier, is the inauguration day of the 47th president, Donald Trump, and his vice president, J.D. Vance. 1941, a German officer is killed in Bucharest, Romania, sparking a rebellion and pogrom by the Iron Guard, killing 125 Jews and 30 soldiers. The Iron Guard, for those that are not familiar, was the Romanian version of the Nazi Party. They were very right-wing. 1942, World War II, at a Wannsee conference held in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee, senior Nazi German officials discussed the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question. 1945, World War II, the provisional government of Belamiklos in Hungary agrees to an armistice with the Allies. Also in this date, 1945, World War II, Germany begins the evacuation of 1.8 million people from East Prussia, a task that will take them nearly 2 months. 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower is inaugurated as the 34th president of the U.S., becoming the first president to begin his presidency on January 20th since the 20th Amendment changed the dates of presidential terms. 1954, in the U.S., the National Negro Network is established with 40 charter member radio stations. 1961, John F. Kennedy is inaugurated as the 35th president of the U.S., becoming the youngest man to be elected to that office and the first Roman Catholic. 1972, Pakistan launches its nuclear weapons program, a few weeks after its defeat in the Bangladesh Liberation War, as well as the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971. 1973, Amilcar Cabral, leader of the independence movement in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, is assassinated in Conakry, Guinea. 1974, China gains control over all the Paracel Islands after a military engagement between the naval forces of China and South Vietnam. 1981, 20 minutes after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as the 40th president of the U.S., Iran releases 52 American hostages that they'd held for quite some time. 1986, in the U.S., Martin Luther King Jr. Day is celebrated as a federal holiday for the first time. And today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. In 1986, Lubao Jonathan, Prime Minister of Lesotho, was ousted from power in a coup d'etat led by General Justin Lekhanya. 1990, protests in Azerbaijan, part of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, or led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. 1990, Sudan's government imposes Islamic law nationwide, worsening the civil war between the country's Muslim North and Christian South. 1992, Air Inter Flight 148, an Airbus A320-111, crashes into a mountain near Strasbourg, France, killing 87 of the 96 people on board. 2001, President of the Philippines, Joseph Estrada, is ousted in a nonviolent four-day revolution, succeeded by Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. 2009, Barack Obama is inaugurated as the 44th President of the United States, becoming the first African-American President of the United States. And unfortunately, so many people treated him as a god. No matter what he said or did, everybody flocked to do it, especially the mainstream media. That led to a lot of issues we're still dealing with today. 2009, a protest movement in Iceland culminates as the 2009 Icelandic financial crisis protest starts. 2017, Donald Trump's inaugurated as the 45th President of the United States. 2018, a group of 4 or 5 gunmen attacked the Intercontinental Hotel in Kabul, Afghanistan, sparking a 12-hour gun battle. Attack kills 40 people and injures a lot of others. 2018, the Syrian Civil War. The government of Turkey announces the initiation of the Afrin offensive and begins shelling Syrian Democratic Forces positions in the Afrin region. 2021, Joe Biden is inaugurated as the 45th President of the United States. At the time of his inauguration, he became the oldest person ever inaugurated till Donald Trump, his predecessor and successor, was inaugurated again in 2025. Kamala Harris becomes the first female vice president of the United States, who proceeded to, for lack of a better term, make a mockery of the duties of the vice president. As the border czar amounted to nothing. It was a mess. All right. That ends our little history segment. We're going to do our little news segment. As I said, we're going to lead off with Donald Trump was inaugurated at 12 o'clock Eastern Time as the 47th president. Then he attends a congressional luncheon after the signing ceremony. He has declared the golden age of America begins now. Well, as I said earlier, right before he left the Oval Office, President Biden pardoned his siblings. The entire the entire Biden family, for all their transgressions, have been given pardons. And James Biden, Sarah Jones Biden, Valerie Biden Owens, John Owens, from the law. He said in a statement, "I believe in the rule of law, and I'm optimistic the strength of our legal institutions will prevail over politics. But baseless and politically motivated investigations wreak havoc on the life, safety, and financial security of targeted individuals and their families. Even when those individuals have done nothing wrong and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage their reputations and finances." The media has been very slow to castigate President Biden for pardoning his son after numerous promises he wasn't going to do it. In fact, the pardons came after House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer requested that Trump's Justice Department investigate and The Justice Department recommended he be charged making false statements to Congress about key aspects of the impeachment inquiry of President Biden. Monday morning, he went on another wave of preemptive pardons. Pardoned Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and everybody associated with the House Select Committee investigation into the January 6th debacle. He had repeatedly vowed he would intervene on his son's behalf, but he broke that promise too. He later claimed he'd broken the promise after finding out Hunter had actually paid his back taxes. Well, it turned out he didn't. He lied about that too. His pardon of Hunter was defended in some corners as a natural move from somebody protecting his own family. But a lot of prominent figures called it a craven flip-flop to damage the White House and the president's legacy. Okay, Trump is going to end birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants. Basically, if you are pregnant and you can manage to get a foot on the ground here, when you had that child, it became an American citizen. And since it needed guardians and caretakers, you and your husband could now stay. Kind of bootstrapping citizenship. But he is signing an order today. He's going to end the birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants. It will slow down the refugee flow. Reporters said in a press call that Trump will sign an order clarifying language in the 14th Amendment and stating the federal government will not recognize automatic birthright citizenship for children of illegal aliens born in the U.S. Some legal experts have said that such a move is a constitutional challenge and can't be made by executive order, but if you'll notice, our former president literally ruled by decree using executive orders. He's going to order the deployment of U.S. troops to the southern border. Stamp out Biden-era. All right, let's talk about a little bit more about the pardons. He also pardoned Adam Schiff, who was given a $16 million fine for his involvement in the Russia hoax. Apparently the fine's out the window. As he was leaving to go to the rotunda, he pardoned his brother James Biden and his wife Sarah, his sister Valerie and her husband John Owens, his brother Francis, Anthony Fauci, as I said, retired General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who called Trump a fascist and detailed Trump's conduct around the deadly January 6th insurrection. Yeah, everybody trumpeted the fact about all the deaths that happened January 6th. There was one, and he had a heart attack. The whole thing was blown out of proportion. The January 6th committee members and staff who spent 18 months investigating Trump, Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, Representative Liv Cheney, a Wyoming Republican who later pledged to vote for Kamala Harris and campaigned with her against Trump. The committee's final report found Trump criminally engaged in a multi-part conspiracy to overturn the lawful results of the 2020 presidential election and failed to act to stop his supporters from attacking the Capitol. Well, that's not exactly what happened. That's what they claimed happened, but that wasn't what happened. Let's see. Indigenous activist Leonard Peltier was granted clemency by Biden. he has granted 8,064 pardons. Trump issued 144 during his first 4 years in office. George W. Bush did 200. Barack Obama, taking care of his friends, 1,927. It's every Trump critic he could find or anybody brought to his attention, he gave him a pardon. George Washington only did 16. John Adams, 20. Thomas Jefferson, 119. William Henry Harrison did none. Zachary Taylor did 38. Millard Fillmore did 170. Andrew Johnson, 7,654. It includes pardons for ex-Confederates. Ulysses S. Grant did 1,332. Theodore Roosevelt did 981. Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1,157. 8,000 and some. It's unbelievable. And of course, he took care of his family. In the final minutes he was president, pardoned 5 members of his family. Well, there's been a question, are preemptive pardons legal? Preemptive pardon, just for your information, is basically a move to shield people from answering for their activities. They're given to individuals before they've been investigated for a crime. For example, in the federal system, you're not actually convicted till you're sentenced, which is why the judge in Trump's trial forced him to come back in for sentencing. So when people use the term preemptive pardon, they mean you're given a pardon before somebody's been convicted, or even before they've been charged or investigated. There was some discussion about Biden pardoning himself. And he said, well, I'm not going to do that. I didn't do anything wrong. I think there's a lot of things he did wrong. But that's just me. Okay, we have been talking about news is coming in so fast. I'm having to flip-flop back and forth among different screens. There was a musical mishap at the inauguration. Carrie Underwood was supposed to sing, and wouldn't you know it, they couldn't get the music to play. So she sang a cappella and did an outstanding job with America the Beautiful. They did everything they could possibly to disrupt it. In his inaugural address, Trump talked about getting down to business. Ramaswamy and Elon Musk were going to run the DOGE. Well, Ramaswamy has bowed out. He's going to run for governor of Ohio. Michelle Obama did not show up at the inauguration. She said she wouldn't. Mike Pence's wife didn't show up. And Democrats promised to stand up to Trump, but a lot of them were at the inauguration. They're balancing efforts to stand tough against Trump while pledging to work with him where possible. Comes as moderate Democrats and Democrats in vulnerable seats have made overtures to Republicans in areas like border security and transgender youth. Oh, one other thing he said in his speech that I thought was fascinating. The federal government from this moment forth will recognize two genders, male and female. We don't have a third magic gender. He said, my job is to do what is best for the majority of the country. A lot of Democrats have promised to stand up to Trump. Well, we'll see. Ilhan Omar spotlights the hypocrisy of politicians who criticize Trump but are showing up for the inauguration. And the closing prayer, there were three different religious representatives. A Jewish rabbi, a black minister, and I think the third one was a Catholic minister. But her and AOC are just going crazy, criticizing Trump before he does anything. Well, let's see. Costco workers are voting for a nationwide strike. Biden told CNN he wouldn't issue preemptive pardons before leaving office. He said, you're not going to see in our administration that kind of approach to pardons. He said that in 2020. And now he has issued over 8,000. In response to a question in 2020, he said, it concerns me in terms of what kind of precedent it sets and how the rest of the world looks at us as a nation of laws and justice. And then he proceeded to make a mockery of everything. CNN's Van Jones says he has no hope about a Trump presidency. He said the President-elect Trump's incoming administration and likely policies on immigration and environment make him feel hopeless for the next 4 years. You got a multi-million-dollar job, but you're hopeless for the next 4 years. Oh, Lord, have mercy. Dr. Fauci accepted the pardon, but said he didn't do anything. Three Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas. And after the pounding Hamas has taken, they had a major force show up in uniform to escort the ambulance to where the hostages were turned over to the Israelis. Hamas is not dead. They've been forbidden to be involved in the political process. But they're still around, alive and well. Well, there have been many people carrying on about how terrible it's going to be with Trump in office. But no matter what he does, he can't be worse than... And I don't like to get involved in politics. That's not what this show is about. However, since I have to deal with the political arena, so to speak, as a disabled veteran, this past administration has made a mockery of that system. All right. Let's talk about haunted battlefields and forts. You know, we were talking about the ghost of Okinawa and people still report seeing crowds of people running toward the cliffs and jumping, which is something that happened when we took Okinawa because the Japanese had convinced the settlers, or the residents of Okinawa, that they were going to be tortured and killed by the incoming Americans. Well, the island isn't the only place you'll find ghosts on Okinawa. The sea itself is filled with occult energy. And the sea-bound spirits are said to be bent on revenge, according to some accounts. Ghosts of Japanese soldiers remain in the ocean just off the coast where the war's bloodiest fighting occurred. They also said these soldiers can be coming back to recruit for their ghostly army. According to one story, a group of Americans attended a party at an oceanside house. During the party, the guests noticed something absolutely bizarre. An Okinawan man who joined the party appeared to be suspended in midair over a second-floor balcony. It looked like he was struggling with somebody who was trying to push him over the railing. As the guests rushed to his aid noted, nobody seemed to be nearby. As if an invisible force had picked him up. Just as they reached him, the force got the better of him, and he fell over the side of the balcony. They rushed the poor man to the hospital, where he remained in a coma for several days. After hearing the strange tale of her husband's mishap, the man's wife brought in an Okinawan spirit medium. This medium said the spirits of Japanese soldiers who lived in the area attacked the man. Americans later found out that many of the neighbors were afraid of those returning Japanese warriors. A lot of folks didn't value balconies very long after dark. Apparently, they didn't want to be drafted to Okinawa's spirit army. Another place that has a lot of stories about ghosts and spirits is the Philippines. You know, some of the most violent, brutal fighting in World War II and occurred in the Pacific. Desperate enemy, brainwashed into a no-surrender mentality, faced off against a massive, well-armed American military, resulting in movable object versus an unstoppable force, cascaded into a conflict that covered a wide spectrum of violence. Hand-to-hand combat, poundings from air and sea, and eventually highly technological weapons that created unprecedented destruction. The fury and terror and misery and brutality and heartbreak of the fighting brewed a storm of supernatural forces that people still experience even today. Witnesses have seen these ghosts of the past all over the South Pacific. In areas that the Japanese invasion forces hit the hardest during the war, as well as during America's operation to claim these conquered lands and islands back from the Japanese. Now, a few places suffered as much as the Philippines, and this struggle still goes on today. You know, during World War II, the seminary that stood on the Dominican Hill wasn't just a spiritual refuge. It was a refuge from the onslaught of invading Japanese troops. Citizens of the Philippines hoped they'd be safe from the Japanese Imperial Army behind the walls of the seminary. They thought perhaps the Japanese wouldn't violate the sanctity of the church. Unfortunately, they were wrong. Japanese soldiers took the seminary over and turned a strategically important site into their headquarters. And some folks said that the seminary became the Army's torture headquarters. Japanese continued to face resistance from local insurgents who the Japanese believed were helping prepare the way for an American counter-invasion. The Kempeitai, the secret police, used the base to extract information from and exact punishment on anybody they felt might be a threat to their occupation. And many of these suspects, along with priests and nuns and other innocent citizens who simply ran afoul of the occupying forces, were raped and tortured and killed at the site. When the war ended, some of the Filipino people may have escaped the grasp of the Japanese forces, but they still remained under the grasp of a spectral occupation. And the proof of that was to be found on Dominican Hill. After extensive renovations due to the bomb damage that American forces inflicted on the site, trying to capture the base, entrepreneurs tried to turn the seminary into a hotel. Well, they found out very quickly that while they struggled to attract guests, they had no trouble marketing rooms to ghosts. The staff and visitors claimed a heartbreaking wailing came from than the corridors of the building during the day, which is not exactly a desirable amenity for a hotel. But at night, things got decidedly creepy. According to several reports, the ghost of a priest stalked the corridors of the building. Guests at the hotel were shocked to see an apparition gliding through the halls. And each report contained one similar gruesome detail. The ghost actually had no head. It's believed that the headless priest was one of the victims of the Japanese secret police. Another story about some guests reported not just seeing a headless ghost, but a headless spirit carrying a plate in his hands. Not exactly room service, and a final macabre twist on that plate was a decapitated head. A lot of residents who live near the site say you don't need to check in to find the ghost either. That hill is teeming with supernatural activity, according to witnesses. Spirits of war victims and their oppressors are said to wander the grounds, something that continues to attract ghost hunters even today. Now, nobody's blaming the spirits, but the hotel didn't stay in operation long, and the site quickly fell into disrepair, and the abandoned hotel and other buildings situated where the seminary once stood soon became the center of tales of the supernatural. And while the hotel industry didn't make a go of it on Dominican Hill, the paranormal industry made a brisk business. Hundreds of paranormal investigators and folks who just wanted a good scare flocked to the former seminary. The abandoned hotel made the perfect lab for the researchers and for thrill seekers, almost like being placed on the set of a horror movie. Over the years, there have been a lot of stories, and some would say evidence of the paranormal that has flooded in. People took pictures, recorded videos purported to show ghosts and other anomalous activity. The site continues to be one of the most popular spots for those looking for run-ins with the paranormal in the Philippines. Certainly not the only occult reminder of this war's traumatic effect on the country. Well, from here, let's go to a World War II military complex that still bristles with paranormal activity. Not all of the World War II ghosts in the Philippines are based on Dominican Hill. There was enough tragedy to go around on the island. It became one of the war's most hotly contested pieces of real estate. The name Corregidor became synonymous with the brutal, furious fighting that took place in the Philippines during World War II. With its thick walls and powerful guns and extensive tunnel system, the island was nicknamed the Gibraltar of the East. Japanese forces who made relatively quick work of defeating the American and Filipino forces in the campaign to seize the country learned a lesson about American and Filipino tenacity when they tried to crack the resistance on the island fortress. Invading Japanese forces relentlessly pounded the defenders of Corregidor. But in spite of the Japanese overwhelming superiority, they continued to fight. Despite the impressive resistance, Corregidor eventually fell and became an embarrassing defeat for Douglas MacArthur. This is where he vowed to return, even as his rescuers evacuated him from the base. And he wasn't the only one that made good on the promise to return. Over the years since the war, more and more reports have piled up at Corregidor that indicate that ghosts and spirits, typically ghosts of soldiers involved in a bloody battle, return to haunt the battlefields and battle-scarred buildings. Infamous tunnel complexes, the ones that the Japanese tried so hard to penetrate and filled up with the dead and wounded as they tried, are probably the most haunted spots on the island. They sure qualify as haunted on looks alone. Long and silent and vast, these tunnels stretch on seemingly forever underneath the base. And if you turn out the lights, the tunnels are pitch black. Visitors who tread through the underground tunnels can probably imagine themselves surrounded by ghosts of battles past. Rumors and reports of Japanese troops have committed suicide, some even blowing themselves up or to avoid being captured by Allied troops, also circulate among paranormal researchers. They claim that these types of incidents only increase the chances of authentic hauntings. Witnesses say they've seen lights glowing and floating down the corridors of the tunnel complex. These are may be reminders of some Japanese soldiers that have given up their posts decades later. They also say photographers have captured this strange phenomena, adding it's unlikely that the glare of the tunnel's minimum lighting or the electromagnetic phenomena is creating this effect in a pitch-black tunnel. And skeptics, though, aren't buying the orb phenomena. They say the photographs could be the result of malfunctioning camera equipment. However, other photographers have snapped pictures that seem to show human figures lurking in the dark shadows of the facility. Things like that are much harder to explain than the orbs. Some of these shots have made their way to major magazines and newspapers in the Philippines. A Filipino magazine called People's Tonight published a photo that showed the shadowy shape of two men. One is kneeling and turned away from the camera, and it looks as though the figure is wearing a cap and a uniform. The other shape looks like he's sitting on the lower deck of a bunk bed. Well, as quite often happens when something like this turns up, a psychic was brought in to investigate. The psychic said the images of the picture of spiritual Japanese soldiers committed suicide by blowing themselves up. She believed the ghostly images in the photos and the orbs that showed up in numerous places captured the form of some type of energy or power given off by the spirits. These photos are said to be another piece of evidence that while General MacArthur and his American forces vowed to return to the Philippines, other forces, spiritual forces, I guess you could say, are apparently destined to never leave. Well, another issue that needs to be considered. When we think about ghosts, we think about who. Who is it that's haunting my house? Or who is it that did this or that? Or what demon's behind the haunted activities in that particular building? But in some of the stories from World War II, you find it's not just people who become ghosts. These hauntings aren't always about who, but sometimes about what. Turns out that things can be ghosts too. In fact, one of the most frequently told supernatural tales about the war concerns not phantoms that are stalking the halls of an old military base, even spirits gliding through the remains of a battlefield foxhole, ghosts that are flying through the clouds and buzzing fields and forest. I'm referring to ghost planes. The skies above Europe, especially the skies above the UK, witnesses reported dozens of encounters of phantom World War II-era fighters and bombers flying overhead. They are not viewed as just as little blips in the sky, but in some cases, the planes are close. They've seen markings and even what appear to be the pilots still manning the controls. And that's not all. As the skies above with on the World War II aircraft, some ghosts are grounded. Visitors and staff members of museums that honor these mighty warbirds claim that ghosts from the past may still haunt the displays, leading to some bone-chilling supernatural encounters. Then we have stories about airplanes that seem to pilot themselves during the war and wonder what forces could possibly be responsible for this. We're going to start talking about ghost planes in a pastoral-sounding Derbyshire in the UK. Maybe the land itself isn't especially haunted, but certainly the skies above Derbyshire countryside are reportedly teeming with paranormal activity. There's a hilly area in Derbyshire known as Dark Peak, considered the Bermuda Triangle of England. More than 50 planes have crashed there, resulting in the deaths of dozens of pilots and passengers. Some of these are actually World War II-era fighters and bombers. And some of the occult experts believe these tragic accidents spawned England's weirdest spectral residue: ghost planes. One of the more famous examples of ghost planes that haunt the British skies, witnesses claim to see a 4-engine bomber from a bygone era lumbering across modern skies. Among these witnesses are aviation experts who instantly recognized the distinctive sound and contours of the bombers used extensively during World War II. One couple was driving along the A6, which is a historic road that runs north and south in the country. In the summer of 1985, looked up and saw a huge plane lumbering toward them. First thing this couple noticed was how low that plane was flying. They could almost touch it. But the weirdness didn't stop there. Oh, no. They rolled down the windows in their vehicle and noticed the plane made no sound at all as it cruised directly overhead, just a few feet above their heads. Both the husband and wife said the plane resembled a British Lancaster bomber. In fact, the plane flew so low, they were afraid it might crash. And then as they watched, it just sort of disappeared. Well, media and law enforcement officials began to receive reports from other witnesses who also saw a similar plane, who were also worried it was about to crash. Oddly enough, the sights came from all over the countryside, not in a nice straight flight path, as you might assume would be the case. Especially if that plane was traveling toward a destination or perhaps an air show. One of the witnesses just happened to be an expert on World War II aircraft. Served 3 years on an RAF ground crew during World War II and was looking out his bedroom window when he apparently saw the same plane the couple had seen. He gave a similar description, but added the plane looked too small to be a Lancaster and was more likely an American B-24 Liberator. And he threw in a few other details. It was camouflage and sported an antenna. Another witness, driving at the time of the sightings, confirmed he saw a low-flying plane traveling southwest during that same period. In each of these cases, the plane didn't make a sound, even though technically the rumble of either a Lancaster or a Liberator would have rattled the skies, and skeptics immediately guessed that the Lancaster, or maybe the Liberator, whatever the case might be, was part of an air show or on its way to a historical reenactment. Reporters for the Derby Telegraph checked and failed to find any information about any air show or reenactment during the time of the sightings. And pilots don't usually take their 4-engine World War II bombers out for unexpected joyrides, especially above Dark Peak. Well, you have to feel sorry for the Spirit World's air traffic controllers responsible for directing the busy, ghostly flights above the UK. According to paranormal theorists, another ghost fly zone exists 60 miles or so north of the Peak District. That region was the center of a ghost plane flap at the turn of the 21st century. And the bizarre run of weird sightings may not be over yet. Newspaper reports suggest that the first round of phantom aircraft appearances began above the grounds of the Rolls-Royce Bankfield factory at Barnoldswick. Ought to be noted, although Rolls-Royce is synonymous with luxury cars, the company also built some of World War II's best aircraft engines. January 23, 2004, a newspaper reported that a tourist visiting Barnoldswick received an unexpected souvenir from her tour. She saw a ghost plane. The visitor said she watched as a huge gray aircraft appeared out of the mist above the Rolls-Royce factory, cruising so low that the woman and her partner thought it would crash into their car and the homes in the neighborhood for sure. But just at the last second, that plane vanished. They described the plane's 4 propellers and said the craft was huge. Most likely suspect based on that description would have been the Lancaster bomber, much like the one that appeared in the Peak District. One of the witnesses was a retired policewoman from Nelson. Told the Craven Herald it was so low I fully expected it to hit us or at least hit the houses near the Bankfield site. We both fully expected to at least hear the impact of a crash, but there was nothing. And when we both looked back, it was gone. Well, trained as a police officer to be careful in observing details, she described that huge plane, saying it had a full set of propellers slashing through the wind. But she was shocked that the plane was absolutely silent. Couldn't hear a thing. She said whatever it was vanished. Wasn't a sound from the engine at all. Really weird, but we both know that what I saw, and I just wondered if anybody else had reported seeing anything. Well, the call for other witnesses, of course, was quickly responded to. Donald Cooper, an expert on aerial phenomena, told the newspaper he was present at the Skipton Research Society, Sirius, which investigates the anomalous happenings in the Yorkshire area. They got a flood of news reports and details. All the reports corroborated the description of the plane that flew over the Rolls-Royce factory. Witnesses all described it as a big plane, a propeller-driven gray bomber. Despite its size, it moved silently across the sky. Interestingly, but typical in the ghost plane sightings, these reports came from all over the area, not simply from spots along a direct flight path. He said, I must have taken 30 more calls since Friday from a variety of people, ranging from professionals to members of the public, counselors to pub landlords. He also said some of them came forward saying they saw something in that description years ago. One elderly gentleman rang to say he had seen the plane the article referred to. He also said there used to be an old airfield at Greenberfield Lane in Barwickshire. Barnoldswick. Yeah, that's it. Very few people knew about that airfield. Coincidentally, it was pointed out that an article that also appeared in a national newspaper last Friday about time slips. It said there have been many reports of people claiming to have seen World War II aircraft as if rerunning missions from 60 years ago. Well, for 2 years, the skies and interdimensional doorways above Barnoldswick remained quiet and ghost plane free. But there was a phone call to the Craven Herald, February 24, 2006, that changed that. The caller, a 70-year-old Skipton resident, told a reporter he saw a bomber that looked exactly like the one that scared the area a few years before. Said the plane was flying low, about 400 feet off the ground, toward a field that once supposedly used as an emergency landing strip during World War II. This time there's no mistaking the type of aircraft. It was a Lancaster. The witness, who asked the reporter to keep his name out of the papers, was alive during World War II and saw a lot of Lancasters. Well, of course, skeptics immediately ran forward with a number of theories. They suggested the witnesses misidentified modern aircraft, such as one of the big propeller-driven Hercules that the Royal Air Force pilots may have been flying during military exercises. The witness was adamant. He knew exactly what he saw. He told the reporter, I saw them during the war, so I know what they look like. This was not a modern plane. Well, the Hercules aircraft was vastly different from Lancaster. According to Cooper, implied the difference would be recognized if anybody's familiar with the World War II plane. He said the modern RAF didn't allow planes to fly at such a low altitude, especially in a relatively populated area. And it wasn't just the quality of the description of the Phantom aircraft that made the sighting impressive, it was the quality of the witness. Well, not just England, but even in America, there are ghost plane incidents. On the morning of December 7, 1941, most of the people in California were going about their normal routine, unaware the first bombs of World War II had already been dropped on American soil, and thousands of American sailors and airmen found themselves caught up in a slaughter. Nobody had any idea that war had come. Certainly not to America's front door, but in all likelihood to its front gate. While many Californians were oblivious, a few others in the state got an early warning that something was amiss. A number of witnesses later recounted that while outside on what seemed to be a normal early December morning, they saw an unusual sight in the sky. Flying low across the horizon was a warplane that sputtered and twisted and appeared to be in considerable distress. Smoke gushed out of the engine as the plane seemed to lose altitude. If they didn't know better, the witnesses would have said the plane had been the victim of some sort of attack. Well, witnesses were stunned as the plane flew out of sight. Some claimed that crash sounds, the crunch of metal and the concussion of explosions echoed through the area. They called authorities, and soon a convoy of police, fire, and emergency vehicles were roaring into the forest toward where the witnesses said they saw the plane crash. As they drove through the forest, the sheriff must have thought they were being dragged into a wild goose chase. And deeper into the dense forest they ventured with no sign of a crashed plane, or even a crash site. I mean, you would expect to see burnt brush or trees shorn off by the speeding aircraft, but they didn't find a single bit of evidence that a plane had crashed. Nobody considered the people reported the crash to be your typical small-town nuts who might get some sort of cheap thrill out of running a hoax. These were some of the area's most prominent and trusted citizens. Well, eventually, the sheriff's team gave up and turned around. As the members did, they promptly switched the radios from frequencies used by emergency crews to commercial radio. And the airwaves are already filled with news reports and special updates explaining the attack on Pearl Harbor. The nation was now at war. Some people put two and two together, arrived at a disturbing conclusion. An air attack on U.S. forces at the exact same time as the appearance of a heavily damaged U.S. fighter plane had to be more than a coincidence. But people who suggested such a weird explanation had to contend with some significant details. California is a good distance from Pearl Harbor, way outside the range of the typical fighter plane of that era. American forces in the Pacific had barely mustered any sort of air resistance to marauding Japanese planes. Well, though there were experts who had another theory, U.S. planes were aloft during the fight at Pearl Harbor, and the vastly outnumbered fought bravely against the Japanese pilots. Historians say at least 5 American pilots managed to get their planes in the air. A group of American pilots chased off a group of bombers preparing to attack an airfield. One American pilot was pulling his P-36 fighter behind an enemy bomber, just about to squeeze the trigger when a Japanese pilot pulled in behind the U.S. fighter. Bullets ripped through the American plane and it began to smoke. Another American joined in, and based on reports, all 4 planes went into steep dives. Only one American pilot, Lewis Sterling, the end of the formation, could pull out of the dive and survive the fight. There are those that now question the appearance of the ghost of the plane over California during the initial moments of World War II. There are those that believe this bizarre sighting is related to the American pilot who was shot down off the coast of Hawaii. The description of that plane resembled the single-prop P-36 flown by U.S. forces. And the amount of damage suffered by the plane, as reported by the surviving witnesses, also matches what was seen on the ghost plane. So the question becomes, did the pilot somehow make it out of the crash and manage against all probability to move his plane back to the mainland? Or could it be that these prominent citizens of California saw a ghostly apparition of the pilot and his stricken plane? A bizarre aerial reenactment of one of America's darkest yet most heroic moments. Well, the juries are still out on that. But on that note, we come to the end of today's show. I do want to, again, make note of the fact that at 12 o'clock Eastern Time, 47th President of the United States was sworn into office. And during the hour before that, the outgoing president was pardoning numerous people who should have faced some type of retribution for their using their office to attack the 45th president. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, you'll be listening to Ken Hudnall on the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great evening.